I came home early that Tuesday because of a migraine, the kind that sits behind your left eye and pulses with every heartbeat. I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to hear any of it. But I walked through our front door just in time to catch 3 words from the speakerphone in the kitchen. 3 words that unraveled 2 years of marriage in the span of a single breath. Your wife didn't leave? And then I watched my husband's face go white as chalk as his eyes found mine across the hallway, and I understood, with a horrible, stomach-dropping certainty, that he had been expecting me to be gone. He fumbled with the phone like a man drowning, jabbing at the screen, killing the call. But it was too late. I had heard the voice. I recognized it immediately. The clipped, precise diction, the way it carried authority, the way expensive perfume carries through a room. It was Brenda, his mother. And the panic in Marcus's eyes wasn't the guilt of a small secret. It was the terror of someone who had just watched an entire architecture of deception begin to collapse. Whatever they had planned for that afternoon, whatever she had been on her way to drop off, it had required my absence, and I had failed to cooperate. Marcus and I had moved into the house on Elwood Street 2 years earlier, 3 months after our wedding. It was my house, technically, a modest 2-story colonial that my grandmother had left to me in her will, the kind of house that smells like old wood and clean curtains and decades of Sunday dinners. I had spent 6 months renovating it, new floors, a kitchen overhaul, a back garden that I'd planted myself on weekends when Marcus was traveling for work. My grandmother, Eleanor, small, sharp-eyed, fiercely private, had bought the house in 1971, raised my mother in it, and kept it immaculate for 50 years. When she died, she left it to me and not to my mother, a fact my mother had accepted with the resigned grace of someone who understood Eleanor perfectly. "She knew you'd take care of it," my mother had told me at the funeral. "She knew you'd love it." I had worn that sentence like a medal ever since. Marcus was a project manager for a logistics firm, often away 3 or 4 days a week, and I was a senior editor at a regional publishing house. Steady work, good pay, a job I'd built slowly over 8 years of early mornings and late nights. We were, by most definitions, comfortable. Not wealthy, but stable. The kind of stable that lets you breathe. We had a weekly ritual of Saturday morning coffee on the back porch, his feet on the railing, mine tucked under me on the old wicker chair, the garden stretching out in front of us, the rosemary I'd planted along the fence releasing its scent in the morning sun. In those moments, the world felt arranged correctly. I felt lucky, and I knew I felt lucky, which is a rare kind of happiness, the kind you can name while you're living inside it. Brenda had always been a presence. The kind of presence you feel even when she isn't in the room. She was 61, recently widowed, and she had raised Marcus alone after his father left when Marcus was 9. She wore this history like armor. She referred to it often in small, pointed ways. A comment here, a comparison there, always framed as love, but landing like a quiet warning. She had opinions about how I kept the house, about what I cooked, about the garden. "Too wild," she'd said once, standing at the back window with her coffee cup held in both hands, though she smiled when she said it. A smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a sharp, precise arc of lips that I had learned to read as an assessment rather than an expression of warmth. When she came for holidays, she reorganized the kitchen while I was out shopping, moving things to where she felt they made more sense. I had come home once to find the framed photo of my grandmother, the one I'd placed on the windowsill above the sink, moved to a shelf in the pantry. "More space this way," Brenda said pleasantly, as though space had been the issue. Marcus thought it was endearing. I moved the photo back and said nothing. In the year before everything fell apart, there had been small shifts I couldn't fully name at the time. Brenda had started asking questions about the house, not casually, but with a precision that I noticed only in retrospect, once I had reason to notice. She asked whether the deed was still in my name, alone, or whether Marcus had been added to it. I told her it was mine, left to me by my grandmother, unchanged. She nodded thoughtfully the way a chess player nods at a board. She asked about the renovation costs. How much had I spent? Had I taken out any loans? Was the mortgage paid off? I answered honestly, because she was Marcus's mother, and I believed then that honesty was the appropriate currency of family. The house was paid off, I told her. My grandmother had owned it outright. I had paid for the renovations from my savings and a small inheritance. Brenda said, "That's remarkable. You're very independent." It sounded like a compliment. I thanked her. She had mentioned, almost in passing during her last visit, that a house like this on Elwood Street could sell for a significant amount in the current market. "You've really increased the value," she said. "All those renovations." "That's smart." I nodded and said something vague about not planning to sell. She gave me a long, considering look over the rim of her cup. "Of course not," she said pleasantly. "Of course." I thought about that look more than once in the weeks that followed. The careful blankness of it, the way it held no surprise at all, without yet understanding why it unsettled me. Marcus had started working from home more frequently about 6 weeks before that Tuesday. His firm was restructuring, he explained, and his travel schedule had been reduced temporarily. He was home when I left and home when I returned, which should have felt like closeness, but instead created a strange, low-level friction, an awareness of being watched that I immediately judged myself for feeling. He seemed distracted in a way I couldn't locate. He laughed too quickly at things that weren't funny. He checked his phone with a frequency that was new, tucking it face down on the coffee table whenever I sat beside him. Sometimes I would catch him looking at me across the dinner table with an expression I didn't recognize, something almost like sorrow. And when I asked if he was okay, he would smile and say, "Just tired," in a voice that sounded rehearsed. There were phone calls he took in the other room, brief explanations, a work call, a thing with his sister, nothing important. He had never been secretive before. Marcus was the kind of man who talked on the phone wherever he happened to be standing, who left his phone screen up on the kitchen counter, who told me the details of conversations that didn't require telling. The new behavior was so slight that for 3 weeks I cataloged it without concluding anything. People change their patterns. People have private calls. I was not the suspicious type, and I was proud of that. I filed each small thing away in a drawer I chose not to open. 2 days before that Tuesday, I had found a Post-it note on the floor behind the home office bookcase. It must have slipped down the back and landed flat against the baseboard. I only found it because I moved the bookcase to vacuum, something I did every few weeks. The note was in Marcus's handwriting, POA, confirm before 15th. B says notary ready. I held it in my hand for a long moment. The paper was small and yellow and unremarkable. POA, power of attorney. The 15th was 4 days away. I told myself it could mean a dozen different things. Marcus dealt with legal documents for his work constantly, and B could stand for anything, anyone. I placed the note on his desk. I did not ask about it. I made dinner and we ate together, and he told me about a podcast he'd been listening to, and I laughed at the right moments, and the note sat on his desk, and I did not ask. I would think about this moment for a long time afterward. The deliberate choice not to know, the way you sometimes choose not to reach into a dark space because some part of you already understands what your hand will find. On Tuesday, the migraine had reached its limit by 11. My supervisor looked at me across the office and said, "Go home without ceremony." I drove back to Elwood Street with my sunglasses on, the radio off, thinking about nothing except the cool dark of the living room and the possibility of sleep. I parked in the driveway and let myself in quietly, moving with the soft deliberateness of someone in pain. Marcus's voice reached me before I saw him. He was in the kitchen speaking quickly, in the tight, controlled tone he used when he was managing stress. I caught fragments as I moved down the hall. "She's at work until at least 5. And then, I told you, this week, before she..." And then the speakerphone caught, amplified, carried clearly into the hallway. A woman's voice, unhurried and precise. "Your wife didn't leave?" I stopped walking. I stood absolutely still in the middle of the hallway, my keys in my hand, my sunglasses still on, and I listened to the silence that followed. Then Marcus's voice, lower. "She's supposed to be at work." A pause. "Hold on." And then his footsteps. And then he was at the kitchen doorway, and I was in the hallway, and we looked at each other. I have tried many times since to describe what I saw in his face in that moment. Fear is the closest word, but it isn't precise enough. It was the specific expression of someone who has built something carefully, over a long period of time, and has just watched the foundation crack. His eyes went to the phone in his hand. He ended the call. He set the phone face down on the counter. He said my name, Sarah, in a voice that sounded as though the word itself had surprised him. "You're home early," he said. I crossed the distance between us and stood in the kitchen doorway. The room smelled like coffee and paper. A dry official smell, the kind that belongs to law offices and government buildings and not to kitchens. There were documents on the table, I noticed now. A manila folder closed, papers tucked inside, a pen beside it, his reading glasses, which he only needed for fine print. Everything arranged with a neatness that looked deliberate, like a scene being prepared for an act that had not yet begun. "Who was on the phone?" I said. He picked up his phone, set it down again. "Just a work thing." "That wasn't a work call," I said. My voice was calm. I didn't choose calm. It arrived without me, cold and purposeful, like water finding a level. I heard her voice. "Marcus, who was that?" The silence stretched. The refrigerator hummed. The sunflower clock on the wall clicked its seconds. He was choosing words. I could see it happening, the careful assembly of explanation. And I understood in that choosing that there was nothing good waiting on the other side of it. An innocent answer doesn't take this long to build. "It was my mother," he said. Of course it was." "What were you talking about?" He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He said, "There's something I need to explain to you, and I need you to really hear me out before..." "Before what?" I said. "Before I have a reaction?" The calm in my voice tightened into something colder and more precise. "Tell me what your mother was asking about, Marcus. Tell me what she was coming over to drop off." He looked up at me then, and the expression on his face was the expression of someone delivering a diagnosis they have known about for weeks. The specific, sorrowful look of a person who has been carrying bad news and has been waiting for the right moment to set it down. The right moment had not been supposed to arrive until I was at work, until at least 5. "She was coming by to drop something off," he said. "What was she dropping off?" I said. Another silence, long enough that the refrigerator completed an entire cooling cycle, and the clock ticked through 11 seconds. "Paperwork," he said. I looked at the manila folder on the table. I looked at him. I walked to the table. I reached for the folder. He said, "Sarah, wait." And I opened it. The first page was a legal document. The header read, in clean sans serif type, "Durable power of attorney, state real estate conveyance." Below that, dense legal language that I processed in pieces because my brain was moving slowly, the way it moves in dreams when you are running and your legs won't cooperate. I read the words grantor and irrevocable authority, and real property located at, and then our address. My grandmother's address? The house where I had planted rosemary along the fence and hung a sunflower clock in the kitchen and kept Eleanor's photograph above the sink. I read, "Agent designated herein, Brenda H. Calloway." And then at the bottom of the page, on the signature line labeled Grantor, I saw my name, Sarah M. Hartley, in my handwriting, or something close enough to my handwriting to pass a casual inspection. The loops of the S slightly too wide, the crossbar of the H a fraction too low. Someone had studied my signature. Someone had practiced it. I turned to the second page, a notarization block, blank, awaiting the stamp, a date line that read the 15th. 4 days from now, when the notary would presumably be ready, as the post-it note in Marcus's handwriting had confirmed. I stood holding the folder, and I felt my body process the information before my mind fully caught up, a cold, cascading sensation that started in my chest and moved outward into my arms and hands, down through my stomach, into my legs, which went soft and unreliable. I set the folder on the table carefully, as though it were made of something that could shatter. Then I gripped the edge of the table with both hands. "This is my signature," I said. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from another room. "Marcus, this is supposed to be my signature. He was standing against the counter with his arms crossed, not in defiance, but in the posture of someone holding themselves together. "I know," he said. "I know how it looks." "It looks like a forged power of attorney giving your mother authority over my house," I said. He said nothing. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed on the street, its radio briefly audible and then gone. "She said it was just a precaution," he started. "She said, a precaution." I turned to face him fully. The cold feeling was still there, but something else was moving beneath it. Something dark and purposeful, like a current beneath ice. "Marcus, a power of attorney giving your mother authority to convey my property is not a precaution. It is a legal mechanism to transfer my house without my knowledge or consent." I heard myself say the words with a clarity that felt borrowed from somewhere outside my body. "How long have you known about this?" A pause. "Long enough." "A few weeks," he said quietly. The world didn't tilt or spin the way it does in films. It simply became very still. The kitchen was bright and ordinary around me. The sunflower clock, the rosemary on the windowsill, the coffee maker with its red standby light. Everything exactly as I had arranged it. And yet the room felt like a stage set now, a carefully constructed imitation of the life I had believed I was living. "A few weeks," I said. "She came to me in November," he said. "She said she needed security. She's been struggling since Dad died. She doesn't have a pension. Her savings are nearly gone. She said if she had authority over this house, she could use it as collateral. Just a loan. She wasn't going to sell it." He ran a hand over his face. "That's what she told me." I picked up the third page in the folder, which I had not yet fully examined. It was a listing agreement. A real estate listing agreement, pre-signed by Brenda H. Calloway, acting agent on behalf of grantor, with the address of a local brokerage at the top. The house on Elwood Street was listed at a price that would net, after the mortgage I didn't have because the house was paid off, exactly the kind of sum that solves years of financial problems. The listing was set to go active on the 16th, the day after the notarization. I set the page on the table. I looked at Marcus. I said very slowly, "She wasn't going to sell it." He looked at the page. Something moved across his face. "I didn't know about that," he said. "I swear to you, I didn't." The front door opened. Brenda walked in with her key, the copy she'd asked for 18 months ago, in case of emergencies, carrying a leather tote bag, wearing a cream blazer, her silver hair set neatly. She stopped when she saw me. One fraction of a second, a recalibration, swift and nearly invisible. Then she smiled. "Sarah," she said warmly, "I didn't know you'd be home." "I'm sure you didn't," I said. She looked at Marcus. The smile held. "I was just coming to drop off some paperwork," she said, directing this at him as though I had not spoken. "For the—" "I've already seen the paperwork," I said. She turned back to me. The smile changed quality. Thinner, sharper, a line rather than a curve. She set her tote bag on the kitchen chair and clasped her hands in front of her. "Then I think we should sit down and talk," she said, in the measured tone of someone who has been rehearsing this conversation for months. "There are things you may not fully understand, and I think when I explain the situation—" "You forged my signature," I said. She didn't flinch. That was the thing that shook me most. Not her presence, not even the listing agreement, but the absolute steadiness of her. No jolt, no shame, a breath. And then, "I had an attorney prepare the document. Your signature is a formality," I said. "You had someone forge my name on a legal document conveying authority over my home. That is not a formality. That is a crime. Sarah." Her voice acquired the patient forbearance of a woman correcting a child who has misunderstood something simple. "I am Marcus's mother. This family has needs that you have been unwilling to help with. This house, that you keep like a museum to a woman who is gone, could solve real problems for real people. I am not stealing from you. I am trying to keep this family afloat." "Keep this family afloat," I said. "He has been carrying this," she said, and an edge had come into it now. The first crack in the pleasantness, the first glimpse of what lived underneath. This house that isn't his. This life on your terms, your name on the deed, your grandmother's photograph on the wall. I was trying to give him something of his own. I looked at Marcus. He stood very still, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. "Is that what you wanted?" I asked him. "Something of your own?" He said nothing for a long moment. Then, "I didn't want the house sold." His voice was quiet. "That part I didn't know." "But you knew about the forged document." "Yes." "And you said nothing. For weeks." He looked up, finally meeting my eyes, and what I saw in his face was not the man I had married with the rosemary in bloom. It was someone made smaller by a long series of choices that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the woman standing beside him. "I thought she just needed the collateral," he said. "I thought it would never actually—" "You thought it would never come to this because I would never find out," I said. He closed his eyes. Brenda shifted her weight. The warmth returned to her voice like a weapon retrieved. "Sarah, I understand you're upset. I think if we sit down and talk through this as a family—" "You are not my family," I said. The words came out quietly, not shouted, delivered with a precision that took the air out of the room. "You are a person who wanted what I have and spent 2 years building a mechanism to take it. And the man who was supposed to be my family stood in this kitchen for weeks, knowing what you were doing, and said nothing." I picked up the folder. "I need you to leave my house, Brenda." Her eyes narrowed. "I don't think you want to handle this that way. There are legal complexities here that could become very—" "You're going to want to stop that sentence," I said. She stopped it. I looked at Marcus. "I need you to go somewhere else tonight," I said, "while I think." He opened his mouth. I said, "Please." And something in my voice communicated that the word was not a request but a line, because he nodded once and took his jacket and his phone and walked past me into the hallway, and I heard the front door close. Brenda and I were alone. She looked at me with the real face, not monstrous, not dramatic, but cold and honest, the face of a woman reassessing a calculation. "Whatever happens here," she said, "Marcus will—" "Choose his mother," I said. "I know. I don't need him to choose me now. He needed to choose me months ago." I held the door open. "Goodbye, Brenda." That night, I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with Eleanor's photograph in my lap and went through every document 3 times. 4 papers in total: the forged POA, the listing agreement, a loan application in Marcus's name with my house as collateral, and the one that shattered the last version of events I'd been willing to believe, a letter from Brenda's attorney to an escrow company, referencing anticipated transfer of title and providing wire instructions for an account I didn't recognize. Not a loan, not security, a full transfer of title, and the proceeds routed somewhere else entirely. I sat with that last page for a long time, reading it and rereading it, and feeling the last small part of me that had been prepared to understand her fall quietly away. I called my father at 11:30. He answered on the second ring, the way fathers do when they have been waiting even without knowing why. I told him everything in order, holding Eleanor's photograph. When I finished, he said, "Do not let those documents leave the house. I'm calling James in the morning." James was his college roommate, now a property law attorney, and my father's voice was even and serious, the voice of a man who understood exactly what he was looking at. "Change the locks tonight," he said. "Tonight, Sarah." I called a locksmith at midnight. James reviewed the documents the next morning and called me within an hour. The signature was fraudulent, the POA was void, and the listing agreement had no legal standing. The wire transfer account, traced in under an afternoon, was held jointly by Brenda and a man named Gerald Poss, her former brother-in-law, someone I had never heard Marcus mention. Further research revealed that the same account had received proceeds from the sale of a property belonging to Marcus's late aunt, 5 years prior, in circumstances that were now, suddenly, very worth examining. She had not been acting out of desperation. She had been acting out of habit. James filed a complaint with the state attorney's office. I gave a statement. The forgery was flagged, the escrow letter became part of the record, and Brenda's attorney withdrew immediately upon learning the facts. She was formally notified of the investigation on a Thursday. 17 days after the Tuesday, I had come home early with a migraine that I will remain grateful for the rest of my life. Marcus called during those weeks. I answered twice. In the first call, he cried, and I believed the tears. I still do. He had trusted his mother the way adults sometimes trust the people who raise them, a trust that doesn't ask for evidence, that doesn't apply the scrutiny we'd apply to anyone else. I was wrong, he said. I should have told you the moment she asked me. I sat looking at the back garden and said, yes, you should have. In the second call, he asked if there was a path forward. I thought about the Post-it note I had found and not asked about. I thought about the reading glasses beside the folder, waiting. I thought about the expression on his face in the hallway. Not guilt, but the fear of someone managing a situation he'd decided I didn't need to be part of. I don't know, I said. It was the most honest thing I could give him. In the end, I filed for divorce in the spring. Uncontested. He signed everything. I say this plainly without ornament. It was painful, and it was the correct thing to do, and those two facts coexisted without contradiction. Brenda was charged with forgery and attempted fraudulent conveyance. The investigation widened. Gerald Poss was interviewed. The aunt's property sale was reopened. Whatever she had built, she built it on the assumption that the people around her would stay quiet, stay confused, stay out of their own business. She had miscalculated once, by one day, by one migraine. Months later, in late September, I sat on the back porch with my coffee held in both hands, feet tucked under me on the wicker chair, the garden in front of me in early autumn gold. The rosemary along the fence had grown thick over the summer. The sunflower clock was still on the kitchen wall. I had considered taking it down and decided against it. Eleanor's photograph was back above the sink, where it belonged, where it had always belonged. The house was mine in the same way it had always been mine, and also in a new way. The way things you have fought for belong to you differently than things you were simply given. She had left me this house because she knew I would take care of it. What she hadn't told me, and what I had learned on my own, was that taking care of something sometimes means being willing to stand in a kitchen doorway, holding a forged document, and saying clearly, "No, this is mine, and I know what it is worth." The morning was still, and the garden smelled like rosemary and summer's end, and I let myself be at peace with everything I had lost and everything I had kept.